It was redone today.
Yeah, I don't know if it made it into the council packet.
2019 council pack is 20. It's right on top.
I don't know which.
Plans.
Yeah, so that was good. So I would say, but Nance, did you get the agenda put up online for people who are at home to be able to follow this agenda if they're watching?
Yes, it's on the.
So another option would be
There's the agendas.
Good evening, everyone. We'll open this special council meeting for Monday, January 7th. Roll call shows that Sam Coons, Lori Osher, Tom Perry, Megan Gardner, Cheryl Robertson, and myself, Cindy Maynard. The reason for the council meeting is for a public hearing to consider amendments to the Town of Orono Town Charter. And so I'm going to read new business order, I guess.
No, it's public hearing first.
Okay.
Just like we normally would do it.
So does anybody have any comments about the town charter?
Would you like a staff presentation?
Okay. Well, wait. We'll get a staff presentation.
Good. All right. I have been working with our town clerk, Shelley Crosby, and council to pull together these proposed recommendations, and just a brief presentation to go through what council is recommending and why, because the why is often more important than the what. So I thought the first thing that was very important was for us to understand what the town charter is. The town charter is like the town constitution. It establishes the council town manager form of government. Ours was, our charter was originally created in 1969 and adopted in 1970. So there was some modification in the early 80s, but otherwise it has remained pretty much untouched. It vests powers in the town council and defines roles, responsibilities in very general terms of the town council. And the reason that that's important is in many communities in Maine, the power lies in the town meeting as the legislative body. When the citizens of Orono adopted the town charter, they vested almost all of those legislative powers in the town council, to the point that Orono Town Council can only be checked for actions that they've taken through a petition process. And any decision that needs to be made for the town council has the authority to make. So very rarely would you go to referendum for a municipal issue. Sometimes there are state requirements that might have you go to referendum, like for instance, when RSU 26 was formed, that went to referendum. So in the town of Orono, we adopted a pure town council, town manager form of government. There is no town meeting or voter input unless they seek through their own methods a petition or initiative process. Make sense? Okay. We're going to see some beautiful snapshots of Orono as we go through this. It also creates and defines certain boards and committees. So in general, the council is authorized to create committees or boards as it chooses. However, there are a few that under the charter you are required to have. So the planning board, the Board of Assessment Review, the Board of Personnel Appeals, and the Board of Appeals. It also vests in and defines the powers of the town manager. This is looking at what authority does the town manager have and what is expected of the town manager. It's kind of like a job description, only not quite as complete as a job description would be. Talks about our annual budgeting process and lays out expectations and how that's going to work. It establishes the municipal nomination and election process. And it prescribes that referendum and initiative process that allows citizens to overrule certain council actions, and we'll talk about that later in the meeting. It allows a mechanism for council to submit orders, ordinances, or resolves to popular vote. So there's nothing that would stop council from saying, gee, we really don't know what we want to do with this. We can send something to referendum. And it also allows residents to enact ordinances by initiative. So if there was something that the town council wasn't interested in taking a position on or enacting an ordinance for, citizens could go through the process to enact their own ordinance. So when you look at the charter, I think the things to keep in mind is that the original charter vested considerable authority in the Orono Town Council. The intent of that charter was for the Orono Town Council to conduct itself in a open, professional way, but to not be hindered by constantly having to send things to referendum. It was. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do in this process. When you look at, the council is proposing a charter amendment. And so the question always comes up, what's the difference between an amendment and a revision? An amendment is minor changes to update the charter. It is not designed to make substantial changes to the intent of the charter, the structure of government, the general way that work is conducted. Charter amendments can be thought about, proposed, and brought forward by the town council. And if it goes and is put on a referendum ballot, it would be either voted up or down by a majority of the voters. A revision is much more substantial. It talks about changing the general intent of the charter. It requires seating an elected charter commission. It follows state statute. The commission would recommend revisions, and it would be accepted or rejected by voters at a municipal election. So as we think about the changes that the council is proposing, if there are changes that people want to make that are substantial to the current charter, we would need to go through a different process. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means the intent at this point was to do minor updates that move us forward and make the charter a more up-to-date and relevant document. So I bet everybody wants to know what the council would like to propose. So there are 5, 6, I had it in front of me, 8, it has increased, articles. The first article is, it applies to the entire document, and that is, shall the voters approve amendments to the charter that update gender references and correct grammatical errors? So with that, we are talking about wordsmithing, not changing the intent or the authorities. We're talking about moving from he and him to they and their, to make things more gender neutral, to refer to councilors as opposed to councilmen. So to update in our modern language. The other thing that we looked at, the people who drafted the charter were not, they didn't like capitalization. So there is a difference between town with a small t and town with a capital T. A town with a small t means a municipality in general, a community. Town with a capital T means the town of Orono, the government of the town of Orono. So we've gone through and made sure that when we meant the town of Orono as a government, it showed up that way. And we did the same thing with counselors because we're talking about very specific people. So we looked at proper use of capitalization. We also looked at punctuation to reflect intent. So I don't know how many people are aware of the Oxford comma issue, but the law court of the state of Maine made it very clear that if you don't use your commas correctly, you're changing the legal meaning of documents. This is a legal document. We need to make sure that it is written the way we intend it to be interpreted. So we went through and made sure that we had commas where commas belonged. There was some wordsmithing when we started to look at changing he, him to they, them, and dealing, especially in the town manager section of the charter, where we ended up flipping some words around because we couldn't make it make sense. Otherwise, we wanted to make it more readable. But again, no change in the intent when we did those sections. Good to move on? Okay. The second proposed amendment was to require that only residents of the town are eligible to be counselors. So currently, what the charter says is a registered voter can be a town councilor. In 1969, when the charter was sent to referendum, in order to be a registered voter, you had to be a resident. Now, you don't necessarily have to be a permanent resident. We had question come up twice with 2 elections just during my tenure, and the guidance that we received from Maine Municipal Association Legal Services was that all somebody had to do was be a registered voter. So when we talked with council about this, council felt that it was important for somebody to be a permanent resident and a registered voter to serve on council. The third article, authorizing the addition of 2 associate members to the Orono Board of Assessment Review, both of whom would be authorized to participate only in the event necessary to produce a quorum, is the town responding to a need. The Board of Assessment Review currently has 3 members. In order to hold a hearing, the town attorney tells me that I have to have all 3 people here, or else the decision can get kicked back. We, at times, have difficulty finding a day when all 3 of our 3 members can be here at a meeting. Having 2 associate members mirrors what we have done on other town boards, where we have people who are trained, sit through situations, and can be elevated to make decisions when there is a lack of quorum or a need for another individual. this would give us more flexibility, especially in a situation where we are, by statute, limited to the amount of time the town can consider an abatement appeal. Good to move on? The fourth article is to recognize the organization of Regional School Unit number 26 and to reflect that pursuant to state law, the town of Orono no longer has a Department of Education. Many years ago, I think we're coming up close to a decade now, the voters of the town elected to move away from our Department of Education and form RSU 26, which exists today. The charter has never been changed to reflect that. So our charter speaks to the authority that the town council has in limited authority that the town council had over the Department of Education, and talked a little bit about how that Department of Education school committee relationship was going to work. We have no Department of Education. And Article 4 seeks to update the charter to just reflect that we send our students to RSU 26 or a successor entity as decided by RSU 26. So it's simply reflecting what is happening today. Ready to move on? So Article 5 is to make it clear that the town council has broad authority to review, amend, and approve the municipal budget and to extend the deadline for the submission of a capital improvement plan. When we reviewed the charter, there was some language in section 1.1.8 that seemed to limit council's authority to not dive into the budget and have the type of discussions that council has. So we lined out that language and made it clear that council has the authority to adopt the budget. It's adopted at the departmental level. Town manager still maintains authority to move budgeted items within, or individual line item within department budgets. So it really seeks to have our language clearly mirror our practice. The other issue that this seeks to address is the charter directed that a capital budget was created and distributed to council essentially once you did all the math by like February 1st of each year. And so what was happening is we would race to get a capital budget out by February 1st, and then we would discover that when the operating budget was due on May 1st, that everything we had done in February kind of got thrown up in the air because there's never enough money. So we would have to make changes. So what this does is it keeps that language there, but it also allows council to make an affirmative vote to move the deadline forward to May 1st along with the operating budget. Is that people following? So Article 6 is dealing with amendments related to municipal nominations and elections, specifically to clarify the priority of state law in the municipal election process, to impose certain ballot requirements, and to require that write-in candidates obtain the same number of votes required to be nominated in order to be successful. So that's a lot of words on a page. What we are talking about, the issue we're trying to address, is that the charter doesn't speak very specifically to elections. It relies on state law. State law governs elections in two different ways. And where the charter is silent on which section of the law we will follow if there's contradictory guidance. We have been advised that we needed to fill that in. So the specific issues that we needed to deal with were write-in candidates was the one that initially brought this to the fore. There are two ways in state law that write-in candidates are dealt with. One, they have to be a declared write-in, go through a process, be known prior to the election. And the other is to simply write in somebody's name, and if they garner more votes than anybody on the ballot, they would be elected. What town council is proposing is that we would follow 30A, Title 30A in state law, if there is a contradiction, no matter where it might lie between 21A, Title 21A, or Title 30A. So you're giving the clerk very clear direction. And in the case of write-ins, we went on further to clarify that we want anybody to be able to run a write-in campaign at any time. However, if there, for example, weren't any names on the ballot, a write-in candidate would have to get at least 25 votes, because we're saying you have to have at least as many votes as signatures that would be required to put somebody on the ballot. So if you can only gather 10 votes, then we wouldn't seat that person, even if they were the top vote getter, which let's hope 10 votes wouldn't be a top vote getter in Orono. But the other question that has come in to the town clerk has been some concern about how we list names on a ballot and wanting to list political affiliation. And what this proposal is saying is that names would be put on in alphabetical order, last name, first name, middle initial, exactly the way it appears on the voter list. So somebody can't come in and say they want to be James instead of Jim if they've registered to vote as Jim. That the other thing that this specifically says is that we will not ever place a political party or other affiliation on the ballot. It is simply somebody's name. Is that so? The last two articles are probably the biggest ones and perhaps the ones that are most confusing. And they deal with the referendum and initiative process. Specifically, in Article 7, Council is recommending that we reduce the threshold number of required signatures of registered voters needed to certify a petition from 10% of the total number of registered voters down to 10% of those having cast ballots during the last gubernatorial election. And let me show you why this is an issue. We went back 4 election cycles and just looked at the gubernatorial election year. And what you will see is that we have a significant number of registered voters and a large difference between that number and the number of votes cast. So in 2018, under the current charter, if somebody wanted to compel council to reconsider an action that it had taken, and that action is limited to in the current charter, single purchases or borrowings for capital equipment or capital projects of $100,000 or more, or to enact an ordinance through the initiative process. it would require 984 votes, signatures. If we went to votes cast, it would require 45 signatures, we would round up. The difference is almost 540 signatures. So this issue was brought up that there is a short time frame to collect these signatures. You're allowed 20 days if you are trying to compel council to reconsider an action that it has taken, an ordinance that it has adopted, or a borrowing, or a purchase of over $100,000. You only have 20 days to collect your signatures. And the reason that that's important is everything stops while we wait. Once the petition is pulled, we now can't buy what we were going to buy or borrow what we were going to borrow. So you are, if we have to pause for much more than a month could make bids invalid or quotes invalid, which is why that 20-day time frame really is difficult to move. However, council looked at the number of signatures that somebody had to collect and felt like it seemed reasonable and in keeping with what other communities did to base that on a percentage of the votes cast as opposed to the number of people on a voting list. The other issue we have with our voting list is in order to take somebody off a voter list, it takes time. So we are always going to have more people on our list given the quality, given the makeup of our community where we have quite a few transient folks. They have to miss a certain number of elections before we start our process to remove them from the list. So this was council's suggestion to still, I think the intent is not to run government through a referendum and initiative process, but to make sure that there's still a reasonable check and balance to council action. Good to move forward. Questions? So the last amendment is Article 8, and it seeks to increase the threshold for sending certain town council purchases and borrowings to referendum from $100,000 to $500,000. And when the charter was adopted in 1969, that $100,000 threshold was huge when you consider that the entire municipal budget, including schools, in 1969 was $1.57 million total. A road reconstruction project that was paid for in 1969 was $20,000. When I look at the cost of what across the country, which seems to be, doesn't change very much from side to side of the country, a fire truck back in 1969, I actually found it on the internet, cost $30,000 for an engine. That same engine costs us $400,000 today. A ladder truck was $62,000. We would spend $1.2 million on a ladder truck today. A brand new ambulance, $8,995 as compared to about $170,000 today. So when we look at not the pure dollar amount, but rather the intended threshold being not an everyday purchase, but rather something that was above the norm, $100,000 didn't really fit in 2019 dollars. So when we adjusted for inflation, and there are lots of different indexes to use, when I plugged in, I pulled up the 2019 dollar equivalent to $100,000 being between $670,000 and $700,000. When council talked about that, they felt like, given our budget and our traditional purchases and being reasonable and fair, that 500,000 seemed like a reasonable place to be. So I want to put that into perspective for you. Just in the last 5 years, we've bought ambulances as part of our general rotation at $170,000 a piece, loader for $250,000, trucks for like public works trucks ranging from $110,000 to $175,000. We have an upcoming in this budget $250,000 capital infrastructure project at the culvert replacement on Route 2. We have the drainage project that just happened on Mill Street that was a total of $210,000. And we have upcoming budgeted $312,000 for North Main Avenue. So the idea that $100,000, yes, it is a lot of money, but when we think about the general scope of our day-to-day operations with those capital purchases and capital infrastructure projects, $100,000 at that threshold could really begin to be governing through referendum, as opposed to referendum being there for the large outside the scope of the daily activity. The other thing that's important to understand with referendum and initiative, and the question's been asked by a couple of residents at this point, once a petition is accepted and certified by the town clerk, the town council does not have a mechanism to stop the referendum process. It simply can decide when it's going to schedule the election for. In the meantime, the purchase doesn't happen, the borrowing doesn't happen, and the ordinance doesn't become effective. So this process can be quite disruptive, but it's here as a check and a balance to council. And I think the effort at this point was to try to find a balance between being able to do the work of the town, at the same time make sure that there was an adequate check to council. And that is it. Can I just finish up by saying this process, just so we understand the process, tonight is the public hearing for people to tell us what they think. We have received some questions and some comment. If council wanted to change articles, minor changes can happen. However, anything, much like our ordinance process, if we are going to make a change that is not discussed tonight, we can't do that. And we would just put this on the shelf until next year. We can only hold this referendum on annual town election night or day. So the process would be to take public comment, for council to then consider an order that's been drafted by the town attorney to send this to referendum. You can either say, yes, we would like to. You can say, yes, we would like to with this minor revision. And or you can say, we're really not ready for this, and decline to authorize the order. At that point, we would wait and go back to the drawing board.
Sophie or Sam, if you don't mind, I'll ask public comment and then we'll answer. So is there any public that has any comments or questions? If you would come to the podium, sir. What's it? You can, yeah. We'll get to that in a minute. Go ahead, Ryan.
Hi, my name is Ryan Tipping. I live on Main Street. I just had one question about Article 2, and that is the municipality approving amendments to require only residents of the town are eligible to be counselors, as summarized below. I've been looking at this language all day. I had a conversation with the Secretary of State and a couple people in the State House who deal with this law quite a bit, and I don't see where this exact change actually makes a change. And I was just wondering if someone could help out. It says only voters are residents of instead of only voters who reside in. And as far as I know, the only test of residence laid out in Maine law is the same for registering to vote as it is being a resident. So I guess that's just a question I have. If I can get some light shed on that. If this is just a matter of rephrasing it to make it better with MMA suggested language, that's fine. I just want to make sure there's no unintended consequences and it's doing what you hope it to do.
So do you want to?
Shelley Crosby, Town Clerk. So in reference to your question, when we look at voting residency versus residency, a residency in the state of Maine means a place that you are calling home, the place you plan to return to. So if someone was to move here from another state and take up residency within the town of Orono, they would be required within 30 days to re-register a car here in Orono. If they had purchased a home or were to set up utilities, all of those addresses would go to the resident address. Under Maine state law, our tuitioned students or our college students are in a unique bracket in which they can be a resident of another state, meaning that their permanent home, where they plan to return to, would be the state that they came from. However, when they come to Orono, they have the right to cast a ballot and to register here as their voting residency. So by showing that they have a ID of some kind, birth certificate or a government document, photo ID, and then also showing some type of a tuition statement, a rent or a lease receipt, showing that they are paying for rent in Orono, they would be allowed to register to vote and to cast ballots here in Orono, but they would not be under the same residency requirement that they would then have to register their cars here and change everything to, change the license. They can retain their license in another state, and they can retain the place that they call home as that other state. College students are unique in that. As far as I know, they're the only classification that we have under Maine state law in which they can do that. So I'm not sure, Ryan, if that really answered your question, but I am speaking to the different types of voting residency provisions that we have under 21A, as opposed to just someone saying that they're a resident of the state of Maine.
I think part of it, Ryan, is about clarifying. So in the two situations that we've had since I've been here, where we had somebody living on campus who was still declaring another town as their primary residence, that took out papers. And there was a bit of discussion in the community when that happened. And when we fell back to a voter, what MMA told us explicitly was, if it's a voter and your student has a right to register to vote here, even if they're still declaring whatever town is their home, then they have a right to fill out papers. So we just want to clarify here that the intent is that it be somebody who is planning to live in Orono. Is that?
Maybe I can have a follow-up conversation with the clerk offline.
Yep.
If I can also just add, if I recall from our conversation about this particular amendment, that when going back to how you started this presentation, talking about the intent of the original charter, there was something about the language in 1969, the way that they phrased it meant someone who was a voter and also a permanent resident of the town, but that definition has changed over time. So we're really correcting it to reflect the original intent of the charter.
Anyone else have anything? Sam, did you have a question or a comment?
Oh, no, it's just, I was just curious if considering this is public comment, that Leo Kenny couldn't make it, but he did email us. We all received that, but I didn't know if for public record, we should bring that point up and see if that generates other public comments. Were you going to read that?
Sure. No, you can read it if you would like.
He asked a bunch of questions. Would you like me to, or when Sam asked the question, for me to give him the answer that I think is the answer?
Sure.
Should I read the whole email
No,
or skim it over? I mean,
Just the questions, probably.
sure. 2 questions. Okay, this is from Leo Kenny. Brings up some good points. First of all, question 1: has the overrule of action of council ever been used? If so, can you specify when and for what?
So I've done a little bit of research. We went back 16, 18 years, and we could not find any record that this had been used. This was attempted back when the council adopted a fireworks ordinance. We had an individual who very much wanted to have it repealed. I think he needed in the neighborhood of 800 signatures, and he was not able to get all 800 within the time frame, so it didn't go anywhere. But that is all that we can find. I don't see any other record.
Second question he provided: can you provide the full list of capital purchases within our current year budget that are greater than $100,000, and the full list of capital purchases within our current year budget that are greater than $500,000? I don't think we need the complete list, but if you have a good shot.
I think I gave you a pretty good synopsis of that.
great. I think there was one other thing about the threshold, the initiative.
If I'm understanding those changes.
Sure. No, 1 and 2 down here. As you said, I support changing the number of signatures required for the overrule of action of council to 10% of voters who voted in the last gubernatorial election. But I think the number of signatures for enactment of ordinances by initiative should not change and should remain at 10% of registered voters. The reason for changing one and not the other is, again, assuming I'm reading this charter correctly, that it appears that there is only a 20-day window to gather signatures for overrule of action, but there does not appear to be any time limit for gathering signatures for enactment of ordinances by initiative. Am I interpreting that charter correctly?
I would say yes, he is interpreting it correctly.
So I don't know if we have concern about that as well. The second point is, currently I would not support increasing the overrule threshold from 100,000 to 500,000, even though we did go over what some of the costs are, some of the expenses are. My opinion on this could change based on the answers to my first 2 questions above, but my general feeling is that $100,000 is still a significant investment for a town of our size and should still fall within the overrule of action of council. In my opinion, if my opinion does change, he'll send a follow-up email. Anyway, I thought he brought up some excellent points, and I appreciate the clarification.
Thanks. Anybody else have any questions?
I had one question. On Article 3, where we talked about associate members to the Board of Appeals, or Assessment Review, rather.
Yep.
Both of whom would be authorized to participate only in the event necessary to produce a quorum, as authorized below. So in the planning board, associate members participate fully in the meeting, but only participate in the vote if they are needed to reach that quorum level. So is the intent here to do that differently in the Board of Assessment Review? I don't have any problem with doing it differently. I just want to be sure I'm understanding.
Don't believe that the intent is to do it differently. I think the issue that we have is if all we have, well, actually, I think I would say yes. They are going to do it differently, Tom. And I think the issue we run into is things get kicked back to us. If there are only 2 members there, the courts are saying you have, essentially, you can't lose a member. You have to convince everybody that is there. It has to be a unanimous vote. And so that happened to us once this year, and our attorney said, no, you must have 3 people. And if you don't have 3 people, you have to give the applicant the option of rescheduling the meeting.
So we would only call in an associate member if we have been notified that one of the full members was unable to attend the meeting. Is that how it would work?
So from a practical standpoint, I think all members would get the packet, associate and full members. All members would be able to attend the meeting. It's a public meeting. We would only call upon moving that associate member into a voting position if one of the other members was gone.
Anyone else have any other questions? Sophie, I just had a question on when this is, if it's voted on and put on the referendum, will voters be voting on each article separately?
So this harkens back to the old style town meeting warrant. You're essentially creating a referendum warrant. So each article will become its own ballot question. If you agree to the municipal order, which is what you would be adopting tonight if you chose to, then the town attorney will take that order and craft warrant and ballot for you to review on the 14th and give your final sign off for of January, 14th of January at your regular council meeting.
So I just wanted to ask for clarification. So you said that each of these articles would be something specific that the voters would be voting on?
Yes.
So it's possible that some, but not all, would pass?
So absolutely, you could end up with a voter threshold of based on 10% of the votes cast at the gubernatorial election for the referendum and initiative phase, and a $100,000 limit threshold for appealing council action.
I think just to go back to the last question that Leo brought up in his email about the overrule threshold, I'm guessing that this is coming from not necessarily concerned that we are, I mean, I understand this side where it's like we have these huge projects and we can't have a referendum on every single thing. I completely understand that. I think some of the question is, does this remove a level of transparency? When we have these expenses, there is a chance, before we make these decisions to spend this, we won't just decide to spend $300,000, but it is presented here. There is public comment, correct? I just want to make that perfectly clear for the record, so it doesn't appear that we're giving the town the right to spend $500,000.
So I think I would bring this back to a point that Megan echoed earlier in the public hearing, which is the intent of all of these proposals was to update the charter and live within the original intents. So when you look at a threshold of $100,000 adopted 9 years ago, that when you look at the budget for the context of where did that fall? You know, if they were always making $100,000 purchases, you'd say 500 is really outside the realm. But when this initial charter was adopted, what the voters said was, we are giving the Orono Town Council the power to make these decisions for us. They are the legislative body. However, our check to that is almost 5 times what a road project would have cost, and clearly more than any. I think a plow truck. The number I saw in here for a plow truck was $15,000 or $16,000 as opposed to $170,000. So when I look at this, it's not about can the council spend money or not spend money. It's rather, it's more about the authority and the power that has been granted to council, and are we keeping that same threshold? That's more what I looked at with this.
I understand. I appreciate that. I want to make sure that that is really being clear out there, so it's
That-
not misinterpreted
So
by looking at that.
council can't spend anything that gets spent has gone through the budget process, has gone through a very open meeting process describing why we need something and giving voters the opportunity to speak on that individually.
There's also always the check of the ballot box. So if someone were to come to our meetings and consistently find we were overspending in their opinion, they could feel free to not vote for us.
Okay, if that is it, no other public comments, I will close the public hearing and move on to new business. Order 1901, everybody sit back. Order pursuant to 30A MRSA Section 2104, the municipal officers of the town of Orono hereby direct the town clerk to place the following articles on the municipal election warrant to be voted on March 12th, 2019. Article 1, shall the municipality approve amendments to the municipal charter of the town of Orono updating gender references and correcting grammatical errors as summarized below. I'm not reading the summary. Article 2, shall the municipality approve amendments to the municipal charter of the town of Orono to require that only residents of the town are eligible to be councilors? Article 3, shall the municipality approve amendments to the municipal charter of the town of Orono authorizing the addition of 2 associate members to the Orono Board of Assessment Review, both of whom would be authorized to participate only in the event necessary to produce a quorum. Article 4, shall the municipality approve amendments to the municipal charter of the town of Orono to recognize the organization of Regional School Unit Number 26 and to reflect that, pursuant to state law, the town of Orono no longer has a Department of Education. Article 5, shall the municipality approve amendments to the municipal charter of the town of Orono to make clear that the town council has broad authority to review, amend, and approve the municipal budget and to extend the deadline for submission of a capital improvement plan. Article 6, shall the municipality approve amendments to the municipal charter of the town of Orono relating to municipal nominations and elections to clarify the priority of state law in the municipal election process, to impose certain ballot requirements, and to require write-in candidates to obtain at least the same number of votes required to be nominated in order to be successful. Article 7, shall the municipality approve amendments to the municipal charter of the town of Orono to reduce the threshold number of required signatures of registered voters needed to certify a petition from 10% of the total number of registered voters to 10% of those having cast ballots during the last gubernatorial election. Article 8, shall the municipality approve amendments to the municipal charter of the town of Orono, increasing the threshold for sending certain town council purchases and borrowings to referendum from $100,000 to $500,000. I will take a motion, please. And a second. All right. Any other comments, discussion of council? Hearing none, I will take a vote on Order 1901. All those in favor? Passes 6-0. All right. Thank you very much, Council. Moving on to public comments. Do we have a public comment?
Hi again, Ryan Tipping, Main Street. I'm here with an apology. I meant to come to your December meeting and flag if there were any issues that you wanted brought to the legislature for this next session, and I wasn't able to make it to that meeting. Cloture has since come and gone. I can still bring forward issues to the legislature if you wish, but they require approval by the Legislative Council. So I'm happy to entertain any that you may want me to bring. But I just wanted to bring one bill before you to let you know that I'm pursuing it. It's a resolve to rename the bridge on Main Street after Staff Sergeant Brandon Silk. It would rename the bridge that I think is right now called the Ferry Hill Bridge, the Brandon M. Silk Memorial Bridge. He died in action during his 4th tour in Afghanistan. He graduated from Orono High School a year before I did, 2003. And I was approached saying this would be a good way to remember him in our town. So I put the bill in, and it's going to be considered through the Transportation Committee and follow the usual process in Augusta for bills. So I just want to put that out there to you as members of the council and anyone listening, if they wanted to provide comments and support or not, they could do so when the bill comes up for a hearing. And if they want more information, they can contact me. So.
Ryan, could you also maybe tell us, and we could put it on the website when the hearing
Absolutely
comes up?
Brandon's brother, David, worked for the town as a police officer for several years. And my understanding is that the family is very touched by this. I would intend, unless I hear otherwise from council, to assist Ryan in any way that I could to make this happen. I think it's a good thing for our community.
The other thing I wanted to just tell you, Ryan, is we did tell Jim Dill some of the things that we were supporting, but we didn't have any bills, so.
Okay, great. I believe Councilor Perry is going to speak to me about revenue sharing now.
Well, I'm going to speak to you about the legislative agenda that's being proposed by Maine Municipal Association. There are a number of bills, some of them dealing with revenue sharing, but other bills as well, and I hope you will follow those legislative initiatives. I am a member of the Legislative Policy Committee, and the Legislative Policy Committee represents every senatorial district in the state, and all of the bills that are being presented, are being supported and lobbied for by Maine Municipal have the support of the Legislative Policy Committee.
Absolutely. I'm fortunate enough to return as chair, House Chair of the Taxation Committee, which, among other things, receives the revenue sharing bills. I believe there's a couple other bills that are headed to my committee as well, including a way to help people who can't afford property taxes. It's been called a reverse mortgage bill. It's been called a bunch of other things, but it basically brings back the state fund that allows the state to take over the payments and then make that back by selling the house afterwards. So yeah, I look forward to seeing a lot of those. I know at least one councilor in the past has approached me about a local option sales tax before. I'm not fully sold on that, but we don't even know what the bills look like in that vein. And I'd be happy to have conversations with any of you or any member of the public about any of those bills coming up.
So we wouldn't want this opportunity to go by without saying that the Orono Town Council strongly supports bringing back full revenue sharing, and it would make a huge difference to our taxpayers should it come back. But I also know from our conversations you fully support it as well. So there's that, and then having you here is also an opportunity to just thank you. Every time I have folks leaving Westwood and being able to take a left, that is thanks to your hard work. You really carried a lot of water with that, Ryan, and it looked like it was dead on arrival, and you work very hard for our community and appreciate it very much.
the state police worked with me to bring the bill up to their standards, and I appreciate all the work they did on it.
Yes, thank you for all of your work.
Sure. And in the future, OronoRyan@gmail.com, 866-4333 is my phone number. And I live right on Main Street, 279 Main. If you have any issues, please feel free to contact me.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
You going to do the municipal? I just thought about Aaron's seat while you were.
So I have two things that I could have said in the other meeting, but wanted to have it on camera if possible. The first is that we advertised for a vacant position on the Orono VZ Water District Board of Trustees. Jason Bolton, who has served us very well for many years, has decided that he is at the end of his service. He has agreed. He still is attending meetings. He'll stay in that seat until a successor is found. We have not received any interest in the position. So we really need some help finding an individual who's willing to serve. And at this point, I would say not to let the 5-year term frighten people away. If somebody thought they could give 3 years, then council could cross that bridge when you came to it. But it's an important position. Boyd, the superintendent, reports that things are going very well in the district right now. They're making lots of progress towards meeting their long-term goals. And I think if somebody was interested in beginning public service, this would be a pretty good way to start. It's very focused and not a huge commitment of time. So, I mean, once a month, there is a commitment of time, but it's not as big as others. The other announcement I wanted to make, so my intent is to re-advertise, and I certainly hope that people will let folks know that this opportunity exists and hopefully get some good candidates for council to consider. The other announcement I wanted to make is that back in November, House District 124, that seat was open for House of Representatives, and Aaron Fry won election. He was later selected to be the Attorney General, and so he declared to be seated. I've talked with council about this. Cindy wrote a lovely letter for the previous governor who elected not to do anything. It was great because the same day that I emailed off the second letter on the 3rd of January, we received notice from the Secretary of State's office that Governor Mills has declared it vacant, and the Secretary of State has scheduled the hearing, the election on March 12th, which happens to coincide with our municipal election. I think our town clerk did a very nice job lobbying the Secretary of State's office to explain how confusing it might be to voters to run 2 elections simultaneously on different days. It might be a little bit confusing to folks because I think we have some people that don't necessarily understand which House district they're in to begin with. They come to the voter intake and say their name and get a ballot, and they elect whoever they want on that ballot. So I am meeting this week with library staff to make sure that they understand and have maps for the districts and understand this process in general terms. But yes, so when somebody comes in for an absentee ballot for our municipal election, if they're in House District 124, they will also get a ballot for the new, to seat the new representative. This is an abbreviated nomination process. It's different. It's run through the parties, so people won't go through the same process that they normally do. But Secretary of State's office has that well in hand.
The last item before we adjourn is, and Sophie, you're going to have to help me with the explanation on this. We have a TIF district that we need to get a public hearing on for February 11th. I'll let you go from there.
So we have a request for a tax increment financing district that started with the new Orono Brewing Company, and we actually pushed it out to include Ayers Island because that is a place in our comprehensive plan that we say is ripe for development. We are just getting back the legal documents along with the cost shift and all the data that council will need to consider. But in order to meet the March 1st deadline at the Office of Community and Economic Development to consider the district, we need to put a public hearing on the February 11th council meeting. In order to put a public hearing on the February 11th council meeting, we really need to know that we're headed in the right direction in a place that council will agree to. So we'd like to be able to have a meeting so that we can sit with all of council and talk about what the shift would be, what the TIF means, how it works, go through the legal documents. If I waited until Community Development Committee, I am concerned for two reasons. One, it's only a portion of council that would necessarily be at that meeting. And it is cutting the notice so tight that I would actually have to send something to the newspaper prior to council seeing the documents. And in my opinion, this is too big for that to happen. So my request to Cindy was to consider meeting. Sometimes we do the meeting before the meeting. And so I was looking at the 14th as a workshop to be able to review these documents and meet the time frame. I understand there might be some conflict, and that's why I brought it to Cindy. January 14th.
So, yeah, so we were wondering, one, if people would be available like 6 o'clock before the 7 o'clock meeting. And we also understand that there might be a public press conference, and we don't want in any way to look like we're trying to get in the way of that. So,
Well, this sounds like something very important to do, so I could change my timing.
okay, if that's possible, that would be great. Would counselors be able to make a 6 o'clock on Monday?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. This is exciting. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Lori. Thank you, council, for hanging in there and for doing all this. I will take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Nancy has something for you to sign. Then you can leave.
Yeah, I did research.
I remember this. The same thoughts.